Do you remember the long-lost desserts that once filled our kitchens with warmth and pride? These were the sweets that carried families through hard times, made from love when ingredients were few. How did something so rich in memory ever fade from our tables? Molasses stack cake was not just a dessert. It was a symbol of togetherness, born from scarcity and shared effort. Each layer of cake was baked by a different hand, carried from one household to another, and stacked high with thick, sweet molasses or sorghum syrup in between. It was often made for weddings or church gatherings, where every family contributed what little they had. The syrup soaked through the layers overnight, turning a once simple cake into something soft, dark, and deeply flavored with spice. Its sweetness wasn't loud, it was patient, like the people who made it. The scent of ginger and sorghum filled kitchens built on faith and firewood, where every bite reminded families that joy could rise even out of hardship. To cut into a stack cake was to taste community itself, one layer of generosity at a time, held together by the sweetness of shared survival. Cornmeal pound cake was a thrifty twist on a classic, made by those who refused to let poverty rob them of pleasure. When fine white flour was too costly, cooks reached for cornmeal, the golden grain that had carried generations through hunger. The cake came out dense, hearty, and rich, its grainy texture softened by eggs, butter, and sweet milk when available. It baked slow, filling cabins and cottages with a buttery, nutty warmth that made the simplest home feel like a place of celebration. This was the kind of dessert that came from instinct rather than instruction, measured by memory instead of spoons. Each slice told a story of adaptation, of turning necessity into comfort. The cornmeal gave it grit, but also character, a reminder that sweetness could come from the humblest roots. For many, this was the real taste of home, simple, honest, and strong enough to last. Sweet potato tea cakes were soft little miracles that brought a whisper of sweetness to hard days. Made from mashed sweet potatoes, sugar, and flour, they baked up tender and fragrant, somewhere between a cookie and a biscuit. The flavor was deep and earthy, tied to the African roots that first carried sweet potatoes across the ocean. Women baked them for children after long hours in the fields, serving them with tea, molasses, or just a kind word. The dough was often mixed by hand in wooden bowls, shaped without measuring, guided only by touch and memory. Even in times when sugar was scarce, the natural sweetness of the potato carried the recipe through. Each cake was a lesson in resourcefulness and care, a soft, spiced offering that said, "We made it through another day." To eat one was to taste both survival and love, baked gently into every crumb. Vinegar cobbler was born out of clever desperation, a pie made without fruit when fruit was nowhere to be found. During lean times, cooks discovered that a few spoonfuls of vinegar could mimic the tang of apples or berries when mixed with sugar and spice. The filling bubbled golden beneath a biscuit crust, the scent of caramel and acid mingling in the air. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like luxury to those who made it. Every bite was tart, sweet, and full of resilience, a dessert that turned an empty pantry into abundance. The vinegar balanced the sweetness perfectly, fooling even those who didn't know the secret. For families scraping by, this dish was proof that imagination could be as nourishing as food itself. Vinegar cobbler might have vanished from modern tables, but in its time, it was a triumph of spirit baked into a humble pie dish. Blackstrap molasses pie was a masterpiece of thrift and flavor, born from necessity and shaped by the hands of enslaved and freed cooks alike. Made from the thick, dark syrup left after refining sugarcane, it turned bitterness into beauty. Eggs, butter, and a pinch of spice transformed it into something glossy and rich, a dessert that shimmered like polished wood under the oven's glow. It tasted of smoke and sweetness, deep and unapologetic. This pie was not about delicacy, it was about endurance. Even when sugar was out of reach, molasses stood in, sweetening the lives of those who had little else. A slice of it was heavy with meaning, connecting field to table, struggle to celebration. Long after it cooled, its scent lingered, a quiet testament to resourcefulness and grace. In every bite of Blackstrap molasses pie was the history of turning scarcity into art. Parched corn candy was a small sweet treasure crafted from the same grain that fed the body and the spirit. Roasted corn kernels were ground fine, mixed with honey or molasses, and pressed into sticky rounds that hardened as they cooled. They were both candy and sustenance, pocket-sized energy for the weary and a rare treat for children. The flavor was smoky and sweet, a reminder of the fields that gave both labor and life. These candies were made during quiet evenings by the fire, when laughter mixed with the scent of roasted corn and syrup. Every piece was hand-shaped and precious, because sweetness was a luxury few could afford. Yet in those moments, sweetness was not just taste, it was resistance. Parched corn candy was proof that joy could be made even when the world refused to give it freely. Sorghum custard pudding was the taste of warmth on cold nights, made with simple ingredients and endless patience. Milk, eggs, and sorghum syrup came together in one heavy dish, stirred slowly over fire until they thickened into velvet. The flavor was sweet, earthy, and rich with comfort. It was the dessert of those who worked with what they had. No sugar, no fine flour, just what nature offered and hands could make. Served warm, it soothed empty stomachs and weary spirits alike. The pudding glowed like amber in the lamplight, reminding families that care and time could make anything beautiful. It wasn't about extravagance. It was about balance, of hunger and hope, of bitterness and sweetness. Long before desserts were written down, this one was felt in the heart and remembered by taste. Sorghum custard pudding was love made visible, stirred slow enough to last. Cane syrup taffy pulls were moments of laughter wrapped in sticky sweetness, one of the few times children on plantations could forget the weight of their world. Syrup was boiled in iron pots until bubbling thick, then poured out to cool and pulled by hand into shiny golden ropes. It was hard work, but it was joy disguised as labor. The smell filled the air like music, burnt sugar and smoke mingling with the sound of laughter. Kids competed to stretch the taffy the longest, their hands gloved in butter to keep it from sticking. It was a shared delight in a life built on scarcity, a fleeting sweetness that belonged entirely to them. When the taffy hardened, it gleamed like amber glass, a memory you could taste. These pulls were more than candy. They were moments of freedom, soft and sweet, that stayed long after the sugar was gone. Cornbread trifle was the kind of dessert that proved creativity could make even leftovers feel like a feast. When cornbread went stale, it wasn't thrown away. It was reborn. Crumbled into bowls, soaked with sweet milk or molasses, and layered with bits of fruit if available, it became a pudding-like treat that filled bellies and hearts alike. The texture was soft and creamy, rich without requiring riches. It was food for the end of the week, when cupboards were bare but family still gathered to share what was left. Each spoonful carried both sweetness and survival, the magic of making something out of nothing. Cornbread trifle was not a luxury. It was an act of imagination. It turned scarcity into flavor and the ordinary into comfort. Even now, its story lingers, a reminder that sometimes the best recipes are born from the need to keep going. Persimmon bread was the taste of fall captured in a loaf, baked with the wild fruit that grew freely across southern woods. Ripe persimmons were mashed into a golden pulp, mixed with flour, eggs, and spice, and baked slow until the crust turned dark and fragrant. The bread came out moist and sticky, sweet without needing sugar. Families would gather fallen fruit from the ground, washing and sorting them carefully, their orange glow bright against rough hands. Baking it was a celebration of season and survival, a moment to enjoy the land's small gifts. The flavor was rich, tangy, and almost tropical, unlike anything store-bought. Each loaf told a story of time and patience, the waiting for fruit to ripen, the stirring of batter by hand, the sharing of slices by firelight. Persimmon bread was proof that sweetness could be found even when life itself felt bare. Apple brown. Betty with stale bread was the quiet triumph of thrift, a dessert that turned yesterday's scraps into something worthy of company. Old loaves were torn into pieces, layered with sliced apples, sugar, and butter, then baked until the kitchen smelled like home itself. The bread soaked up the apple juices and syrup, becoming tender and golden at once, with just enough crisp at the top to remind you that life could still surprise you. It was food for people who didn't waste a thing, for those who found sweetness in the ordinary. The dish required no exact recipe, just instinct, warmth, and what was on hand. Some added cinnamon or molasses if they had it. Others simply let the apples speak for themselves. Each bite was familiar, comforting, and honest. Apple Brown Betty was proof that love, like flavor, could bloom even from what was left behind. Molasses apple dumplings were small bundles of joy wrapped in dough and baked in bubbling syrup. Whole apples were peeled, cored, and stuffed with brown sugar and spice, then folded into pastry made from the simplest ingredients: flour, lard, and a pinch of hope. As they baked, the molasses caramelized into a thick, sticky sauce that clung to the edges like honey. The scent alone could fill a home with warmth, even when winter winds pressed hard against the walls. Families made them during harvest season, a celebration of labor and reward, of fruit gathered and shared. They were sweet, tart, and heavy with meaning, the taste of both work and rest. The sauce was spooned over each dumpling as it came out of the oven, pooling into a dark, glossy sweetness that felt like abundance. Each bite melted between the teeth, soft and fragrant, carrying traces of cinnamon and smoke. Served with milk or cream if one was lucky, these dumplings carried comfort through generations. In their syrupy folds lived the story of people who refused to let hardship steal the sweetness from their table, who baked hope into every humble crust. Caramel bread pudding was born in the corners of quiet kitchens, where nothing was wasted and everything had purpose. Day-old bread soaked in milk, eggs, and sugar became a dessert of astonishing richness, once baked with a drizzle of caramelized syrup. The edges crisped, while the inside stayed soft and custard-like, every bite warm and buttery with a hint of burnt sugar. It was the sort of dessert that stretched humble ingredients to their full glory, comforting, dependable, and generous. People made it after Sunday supper or for gatherings, serving it straight from the pan with spoons and laughter. The sweetness wasn't just in the taste, it was in the act of turning leftovers into something beautiful. The caramel, cooked just long enough to darken but not burn, gave depth to the flavor, transforming simplicity into elegance. Sometimes raisins or nuts were added, sometimes a dash of spice. But the heart of the dish remained the same: resourcefulness turned delicious. Caramel bread pudding was not a dish of luxury, but of gratitude, a way of saying that even what seemed forgotten still had worth, that love could be reheated and shared again. Sweet grits porridge was the kind of comfort that could quiet an empty stomach and soothe a tired heart. Made from ground corn simmered slowly in milk or water, it was sweetened with molasses or sugar and sprinkled with nutmeg or cinnamon when available. Its texture was thick and creamy, somewhere between pudding and porridge, a warmth that filled the room as it cooked. Often eaten for breakfast but remembered as dessert, it was a reminder that sweetness did not require abundance. Children waited by the pot, hungry for the first spoonful, while elders stirred patiently, knowing good things took time. Sweet grits were nourishment for both body and soul, a soft echo of survival flavored with care. Sometimes a pat of butter was dropped in to melt, swirling gold through the creamy surface. The pot was scraped clean every time, not from hunger alone, but from gratitude. Even today, its simplicity endures, whispering that comfort does not come from riches. It comes from hands that know how to make enough feel like plenty, from people who turned a bowl of corn into memory. Buttermilk pie was the taste of calm after storm, smooth and steady like the rhythm of a southern kitchen. Made from buttermilk, eggs, sugar, and a little flour, it baked into a golden custard that cracked ever so slightly as it cooled. The tartness of the buttermilk met the sweetness of the sugar in perfect balance, simple yet elegant. It was the kind of dessert families made when fruit was gone and patience was all they had left. The pie was a comfort to those who lived by the seasons, making do with what they could churn or gather. Served with coffee or eaten straight from the pan, it held a quiet dignity that needed no decoration. Sometimes it was flavored with a touch of vanilla or a sprinkle of nutmeg, though it needed neither to shine. The first slice always felt like a reward, the last one like a promise to bake again. Buttermilk pie was a slice of memory, reminding every generation that true sweetness often comes from humble beginnings and the courage to make something beautiful out of little, a dessert that tasted like peace earned through patience. Peanut brittle with cane syrup was a candy made from calloused hands and steady hearts. Peanuts, cheap, filling, and familiar, were roasted and stirred into bubbling cane syrup that hissed and popped in iron pots. The mixture was poured thin onto greased pans, cooling into a golden sheet that cracked like glass when broken. It was the sound of celebration in a time that offered few. Farmers sold it at local markets or handed it out at church gatherings, a taste of sweetness earned through labor. Every bite was sticky and sharp, nutty and smoky, holding the flavor of both soil and sweat. The process demanded timing, too much heat and it burned, too little and it stayed soft. Children watched wide-eyed as the syrup darkened and hardened, knowing that patience was the price of pleasure. It stuck to your teeth, your fingers, and your memory. Peanut brittle was not store-bought fancy. It was handmade history, a candy forged from work, patience, and the deep sweetness of Southern earth. Corn pone pudding was the kind of dish that blurred the line between dessert and sustenance. Cornmeal, milk, eggs, and molasses came together in a single bowl, thick as porridge and sweet as survival. Baked slow until the top turned golden brown, it filled homes with the scent of earth and sugar mingled with smoke. The pudding was hearty, the kind of food that stuck to your ribs and stayed with you through hard days. It was spooned out warm, maybe with a bit of butter melting across its surface, turning thrift into tenderness. Corn pone pudding could feed many, stretching ingredients just far enough to comfort everyone at the table. It was proof that simplicity did not mean lack. It meant wisdom. For the enslaved and the free alike, corn was both foundation and gift. Corn pone pudding was never just about feeding the body. It was about reminding the soul of abundance, even when little remained. It was sweetness you could taste and strength you could feel, a humble masterpiece born from corn and courage. Mayhaw jelly cake was a masterpiece of foraged sweetness, made with berries that grew wild in southern thickets. The tiny red mayhaws were gathered by hand, simmered into a tart jelly with a color as deep as ruby glass. That jelly was spread between layers of yellow cake, each one tender and fragrant with butter. The flavor was bright and tangy, a whisper of spring caught inside a winter celebration. For rural families, this cake was pride-made edible. It showed not only skill but the ability to turn wild fruit into beauty. Every slice shimmered with effort, patience, and the joy of harvest remembered. Women and children would wade into brambles to gather the fruit, their fingers stained red as proof of the labor behind the sweetness. The jelly set slowly on the stove, filling the air with perfume and promise. The Mayhaw jelly cake may have faded from tables, but its story remains, a reminder that sweetness often grows in the wild and must be found, not bought. Sweet potato biscuit shortcake was a Southern invention that turned breakfast into dessert and thrift into joy. Mashed sweet potatoes gave the biscuits their golden hue and natural sweetness, while their soft, crumbly texture soaked up syrup or fruit preserves perfectly. These shortcakes were served warm, split open, and filled with whatever sweetness the kitchen could spare: molasses, honey, or homemade jam. They tasted of warmth and memory, of hands that knew how to make something soft out of something strong. Sweet potato biscuits were already comfort. Turning them into dessert made them celebration. The scent of them baking filled the whole house, and their golden crusts gleamed like sunlight on a cold morning. Families passed the tray around, each person taking a piece still steaming from the oven. They were proof that good things could rise from even the poorest cupboards. That sweetness didn't need to be bought. It only needed to be shared. One bite carried both heritage and heart. The golden flavor of endurance turned tender. Molasses cookies were the kind of treat that spoke of both scarcity and comfort, sweetened with molasses at times when refined sugar was too expensive or unavailable. African-American families leaned on them during hard years, blending flour, lard or butter, spices, and molasses into a dough that baked into dark, fragrant rounds. The cookies were crisp at the edges, soft in the middle, and carried the rich depth of ginger, cinnamon, or nutmeg depending on what was on hand. Their aroma filled kitchens with warmth, especially in colder months when families gathered close. They were often packed into tins, lasting several days and serving as an affordable snack for children. Each bite carried a story of resilience, showing how cooks transformed limited resources into joy. Molasses cookies were also staples at community events, baked in batches for socials or fundraisers. Over time, as refined sugar became more accessible, the cookies slowly disappeared from regular baking. Yet they remained tied to memory, representing cleverness and the sweetness of making do. Chess pie was the kind of dessert that whispered simplicity and sang sweetness. It came from a time when cupboards were nearly bare, but love was not. Eggs, sugar, butter, and a bit of cornmeal made magic together, baking into a golden custard that firmed just enough to hold its shape. The crust flaked beneath your fork, the filling melted on your tongue, and the taste lingered long after the last bite. Mama made it when there was no fruit, no cream, no fuss, just the promise of something warm to end the meal. The top would brown just right, with tiny bubbles that caught the light like amber glass. Some said it got its name because folks would ask, "What kind of pie is this?" And Mama would smile and say, "Just pie." But everyone knew there was nothing just about it. It was the flavor of thrift turned tender, sweetness drawn from almost nothing. Chess pie taught patience, balance, and the art of making ordinary things extraordinary. It did not need decoration, just a clean plate and a quiet moment. Each bite was a reminder that love does not need luxury to shine. It only needs a reason to share. Prune cake was a thrifty dessert that turned what many considered a humble ingredient into something rich and satisfying. African-American families stewed prunes until soft, then blended them into a spiced cake batter filled with cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. The prunes gave the cake a deep sweetness and moist texture that lasted for days, making it perfect for large households or gatherings. It was served plain or dusted with powdered sugar, sometimes with a drizzle of simple icing when resources allowed. Prune cake was practical because prunes kept well in pantries and were affordable compared to fresh fruit. Families valued it not just for thrift but also for comfort, since its flavor carried warmth and familiarity. It was often baked during holidays or shared at church events, where its rich aroma filled kitchens with anticipation. Today, the cake is rarely seen, dismissed unfairly by modern tastes. Yet it was once beloved, a reminder that clever cooks could transform simple ingredients into something extraordinary. Prune cake stood as proof that desserts were about heart as much as luxury. Peach hand pies were the grab-and-go treasures of southern kitchens. Mama filled circles of dough with sticky peaches or apple butter, folded them over, and sealed the edges with the back of a fork. They were fried until golden, the fruit bubbling inside, then laid to cool on brown paper that soaked up the extra oil. The smell could stop a child in their tracks. Each pie was small enough for one hand, but big enough to fill an afternoon hunger. They were treats for picnics, church socials, or long car rides on summer Sundays. The crust snapped between your teeth, giving way to warm, syrupy filling that stained your fingers sweet. Kids lined up for them before dinner, trying not to get caught. Some families dusted them with sugar, others dipped them in syrup or honey. No two tasted quite the same, but all shared the same joy. Peach hand pies were freedom disguised as dessert, portable, personal, and perfectly Southern. They tasted of sunshine and home, made from what was ripe and ready. They were proof that love could fit in your hand, warm enough to carry and sweet enough to remember. Jam thumbprint cookies were cheerful and simple, with a small well pressed into each dough ball and filled with jam. They were often made with whatever preserves families had on hand, which made them highly adaptable. These cookies became popular at youth gatherings and school events, because they were easy to bake in big numbers and fun for children to help prepare. During the Civil Rights era, thumbprint cookies often appeared at bake sales that raised money for organizing efforts or community programs. The bright spots of jam in the center gave them a festive look even when times were difficult. Families took pride in baking them, and children carried them off napkins at the end of church suppers with sticky fingers. They were small, colorful reminders that joy could still be made from humble kitchens. Thumbprint cookies stood out not for their cost, but for the way they turned simple ingredients into something that felt special. Sweet potato pie was more than dessert. It was memory, family, and love baked into one flaky crust. The filling came from homegrown yams mashed smooth with sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a touch of vanilla that made the whole house smell like comfort. Mamas baked it slow, never rushing a pie that carried so many Sundays within it. The crust browned at the edges, the filling firmed just enough, and the first slice always went to whoever had said grace. Some folks liked theirs plain, while others added whipped cream or a drizzle of syrup, but nobody argued about its place at the table. Sweet potato pie was the dessert that followed fried chicken and greens, a signal that the day's work and worship were done. Its warmth stayed long after the plates were cleared, sweet but grounded, like every lesson learned at the kitchen table. One bite could quiet a room, another could start a story. Sweet potato pie was proof that home did not come from a place. It came from taste, time, and hands that knew exactly how much love to fold in. Every family had their own version, but they all tasted like belonging, the kind that never left you hungry. Old-fashioned jelly roll was dessert-turned performance, a swirl of care baked into every slice. The sponge cake had to be thin, soft, and baked just long enough to hold without cracking. Mama spread a layer of fruit preserves, strawberry, peach, or sometimes homemade blackberry, then rolled it tight while still warm. A dusting of powdered sugar finished it off, white as a light snowfall. When sliced, each round showed perfect spirals of color and cake, the kind that made guests lean closer just to admire the work. It looked delicate, but it was made strong, like the women who baked it. Jelly roll was the dessert that proved patience and precision could live side by side with joy. Every bite was soft and sweet, the tartness of fruit cutting through the sugar just enough. Children waited for the ends, where the filling overflowed and the shape loosened. The rest was served proudly, a centerpiece born from steady hands and time well spent. It was dessert as tradition, meant to be admired before eaten. A jelly roll said, "We may not have much, but what we do have we make beautiful." And it always was, humble, pretty, and filled with love. Black walnut ice cream was the taste of rare celebration, a dessert that demanded patience and strength. The nuts had to be cracked open by hand, their shells tough as stone, yielding small bits of rich, oily meat. Those pieces were stirred into thick cream, sugar, and eggs, then churned slowly over ice by hand. The flavor was bold, earthy, and slightly bitter, a perfect match for the heat of southern summers. Families brought it out for special gatherings, its cold sweetness shared from chipped enamel bowls. The process was slow, but that made it sacred. Every turn of the churn felt like a step toward joy earned through labor. The cold sting of the ice, the rhythm of hands turning the handle, the laughter that rose between pulls, these moments were as precious as the dessert itself. Black walnut ice cream was not fast, but it was faithful. Proof that good things like freedom and flavor took time. In each scoop lingered the taste of resilience, of people who turned endurance into sweetness and made the waiting worthwhile. Molasses oat drop cookies were the humble treasures of hearth and home, baked in batches that filled the air with spice and warmth. Oats gave them texture and strength, while molasses made them dark, soft, and fragrant. They were spooned onto greased pans, baked until the edges turned crisp and the centers stayed chewy. These cookies were for after supper, for neighbors visiting, or for children waiting by the stove. Each one tasted like comfort. A little smoky, a little sweet, and endlessly familiar. They lasted for days in a tin, softening with time but never losing their charm. Sometimes a handful of raisins or nuts made their way into the mix, though they were just as perfect plain. The smell alone could draw people from across the yard, following the scent of sugar and firewood. Molasses oat drop cookies were not grand or showy, they were steady, dependable, and kind. Like the hands that made them, they carried history in every bite, proof that love often lives in the simplest things, warm, brown, and made to share. Fatback fried cabbage was a simple, deeply satisfying dish that turned a humble head of cabbage into a flavorful side worth remembering. Fatback, a cured slab of pork fat with a rich, salty taste, was diced and fried until it released its golden drippings. Into this savory base went shredded cabbage, sizzling as it hit the hot pan and slowly softening while soaking up all the flavor. The edges browned slightly, giving a hint of caramelization, while the tender leaves carried the smoky richness of the pork. This was a dish that needed no complicated seasoning, just salt, pepper, and sometimes a splash of vinegar to brighten the flavors. In African-American kitchens, especially in the rural South, fatback fried cabbage was an easy way to feed a family, served alongside cornbread and beans or as part of a larger spread. It represented the practice of using every part of what was available, from the vegetables in the garden to the trimmings from a butchered hog. Today, while cabbage is still common, the tradition of frying it in fatback has faded, replaced by lighter cooking methods, but its flavor remains unforgettable to those who grew up eating it. Banana pudding with vanilla wafers delivered pure comfort in a chilled dish that always seemed to disappear before anyone could ask for seconds. Ripe bananas were sliced thin and layered with crisp vanilla wafers and creamy custard made from milk, eggs, and a hint of vanilla bean. Each layer softened as the pudding rested, allowing the cookies to turn cake-like while the bananas infused the custard with gentle sweetness. A crown of meringue or whipped cream sealed the top, lightly browned in the oven or served fresh from the refrigerator depending on family tradition. Sunday dinners and church socials alike relied on this dessert to close the meal with something cool, sweet, and familiar. Children loved sneaking extra wafers, while adults traded stories over heaping spoonfuls. Banana pudding with vanilla wafers captured the heart of community gatherings in the 1970s, proving that the simplest combination of fruit, cream, and cookies could create a dessert experience that felt luxurious, comforting, and timeless all at once. Red velvet cake with cream cheese frosting brought pine needle tea offered a bright and restorative drink when fresh produce was scarce during cold months. Enslaved foragers collected the youngest green needles from longleaf and loblolly pines, rinsed them carefully, and steeped them in hot water until the brew released a light citrus aroma. Rich in vitamin C, this tea helped ward off scurvy and brought a welcome freshness to winter diets heavy with salt-preserved foods. The practice echoed both indigenous traditions and West African herbal knowledge, merging two continents' wisdom into a single sustaining cup. Families continued to brew pine needle tea well after emancipation, and it remains popular among modern herbalists for its gentle flavor and reputed immune-boosting qualities. Its evergreen scent and warm golden color remind us that even in the most barren season, the forest offered nourishment. Pine needle tea illustrates how observing the land and respecting its cycles allowed people to find both medicine and comfort, turning what others overlooked into a sustaining daily ritual that strengthened body and spirit alike. Rabbit and dumplings was the meal that turned a quiet woodland hunt into a hearty family supper when store-bought meat was rare. Hunters brought back rabbits dressed and cleaned, and cooks simmered the lean meat slowly with onions, carrots, and herbs until it fell from the bone. Soft flour dumplings were dropped into the rich broth, swelling as they absorbed the savory flavor and thickened the stew. The dish fed large households through cold nights, stretching a single rabbit to satisfy many plates. Children learned to roll the dumpling dough while elders told stories of patient mornings in the woods and the respect owed to the animal that provided the meal. The aroma of simmering broth filled cabins and farm kitchens, promising comfort after long days of work. With modern markets providing endless options, few families still prepare rabbit in this old style. Yet those who recall the tender meat and pillowy dumplings speak of a warmth and gratitude that no packaged dinner can ever replace. Stewed field peas with cornbread was a southern staple that seemed to appear on tables no matter how hard times got. Field peas were inexpensive, easy to grow, and dried well enough to last through seasons, making them a dependable ingredient when other food was scarce. My grandmother simmered them slowly with onion, maybe a scrap of pork if any was left, until the peas broke down into a thick, savory stew. Cornbread was baked alongside, crumbly and warm, and served as the perfect companion, soaking up every bit of broth. Together they made a full meal, packed with enough substance to keep workers fed after long days in the fields or factories. Field peas were humble compared to black-eyed peas or butter beans, but they carried a taste of the land, earthy and comforting. For families with little money to spare, this pairing was dependable, stretching across generations as a dish of both necessity and pride. Stewed field peas with cornbread filled stomachs, warmed hearts, and reminded everyone that simple food could still be good food. Souse meat was a cold, tangy delicacy that turned humble pork trimmings into something worth savoring. Often made from a pig's head, trotters, or other cuts rich in collagen, the meat was boiled until tender, pulled from the bone, and then packed into a loaf pan with a briny vinegar and spice mixture. As it cooled, the gelatin-rich broth set into a firm, sliceable terrine that was served chilled. For many African-American families in the rural South, this dish was a symbol of thrift and skill, taking what was available and making it delicious. It was often eaten with crackers, bread, or straight from the plate with mustard. The tang of the vinegar, the seasoning, and the rich texture made it stand out, especially during hot weather when lighter meals were preferred. Though it takes time and patience to prepare, souse meat was once a regular sight at kitchen tables and church socials alike. Today, it has nearly vanished from common diets, remembered fondly by those who know the balance of tart, savory, and satisfying in every slice. Summer nights and backyard fish fries, a frozen treat that carried a quiet elegance. Fresh cream and milk were cooked gently with sugar until smooth before being churned with toasted pecans and a splash of vanilla. The slow churning created a dense, velvety texture, while the nuts added buttery crunch in every spoonful. Families often gathered around hand-crank ice cream makers, taking turns turning the handle as laughter filled the evening air. When the lid finally lifted, the sight of pale golden ice cream studded with glossy pecans drew cheers from children and adults alike. Served in simple bowls or between two cookies for an impromptu sandwich, it offered both cool relief and a taste of celebration. In African-American communities of the 1970s, butter pecan ice cream became a symbol of shared effort and shared joy, proving that homemade desserts always taste sweeter when everyone has a hand in bringing them to life. Hummingbird cake rose to fame from southern black kitchens. Hickory nut milk delivered rich nutrition from the forests when dairy was limited or unavailable. Hickory nuts were cracked and pounded into a fragrant paste, then steeped in hot water and strained to produce a creamy liquid full of natural oils and protein. This drink could be enjoyed warm as a morning beverage or used to enrich cornbread and porridges, offering sustenance without reliance on cow's milk. The technique drew directly from indigenous American practices, which African cooks learned and adapted to their own needs. Hickory trees were plentiful across the Southeast, ensuring a steady supply for those willing to gather and crack the tough shells. Even after emancipation, rural families continued making hickory milk for special dishes, and some Appalachian recipes still call for it today. Its smooth flavor and nourishing qualities illustrate how African-American cooks combined local knowledge and old-world methods to create foods of lasting value. Hickory nut milk stands as a quiet but powerful symbol of ingenuity, linking the forest's bounty to a tradition of resilience and culinary skill. Mustard greens with smoked turkey necks carried the flavor of endurance from one generation to the next. During the Great Depression and later years when ham hocks became expensive or scarce, cooks turned to the neck bones of smoked turkey for the same rich depth. The greens simmered slowly in seasoned broth until tender, soaking up the smoky essence of the meat and the spice of crushed red pepper. Families gathered around the pot to breathe in the savory aroma while cornbread baked in the oven. This dish offered nourishment and warmth, proof that ingenuity could turn modest ingredients into a feast. Children learned to wash and tear the greens while elders seasoned by taste alone, passing down a craft more than a recipe. Today, pre-washed greens and quick cooking methods have dulled the ritual, but the memory of long simmering pots and the steady comfort of smoked turkey necks remains a powerful reminder of resilience and shared meals. Shepherd's pie with mashed sweet potatoes was a clever twist on an old classic that fit the budget of black families in the 1960s. Instead of pricey white potatoes, sweet potatoes from the garden were boiled, mashed, and spread on top of a filling made from scraps of meat and vegetables. My grandmother would use whatever was left, bits of beef, chicken, or even pork, chopped small and cooked with onions, carrots, or peas until it formed a savory base. The sweet potato topping baked into a golden layer that balanced the salty meat with a touch of natural sweetness. It was hearty enough to fill everyone, but cheap enough to make even during lean weeks. Sweet potatoes were plentiful in many southern gardens, and they stretched farther than most vegetables because they were filling and rich in flavor. Shepherd's pie with mashed sweet potatoes was more than just food. It was a statement of ingenuity. Families made do with what they had and still put something warm and comforting on the table. That golden crust represented thrift and care, carrying both survival and love in every spoonful. Hoe cakes were more than just cornmeal pancakes. They were a connection to labor, history, and home. Made from a simple batter of cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, they were cooked on flat iron griddles, skillets, or even the flat side of a hoe blade over an open fire. This made them quick to prepare in the fields or at home, perfect for feeding hungry workers. Hoe cakes had a crisp edge, soft center, and a flavor that paired well with everything from syrup to savory stews. In African American history, they represented sustenance during long days and ingenuity in cooking methods. They could be eaten for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on what was available to serve alongside them. While modern kitchens have replaced open fires, the memory of hoe cakes remains tied to family stories and community meals. Their simplicity made them timeless, yet their presence on tables today is far less common than it once was. Lends flair to potlucks and bake sales, filling kitchens with the warm perfume of brown sugar and butter. A buttery shortbread crust was pressed into a pan and baked until just firm before being topped with a gooey mixture of chopped pecans, cream, and dark brown sugar. As it baked again, the topping bubbled into a caramel-like layer that set into chewy sweetness with a hint of nutty crunch. Each square delivered the flavor of classic Southern pralines in an easy-to-share form, perfect for coffee hours and church gatherings. Children loved licking the sticky syrup from their fingers, while adults reached for second and third pieces without apology. In the 1970s, these bars offered a bridge between candy making and home baking, capturing the indulgent spirit of Louisiana without the need for a candy thermometer. Pecan praline bars proved that a little Southern magic and a handful of pecans could turn an ordinary afternoon into a festival of sweetness worth every bite. Butter pecan ice cream was the homemade reward for hot summer. Cane top syrup began with the earliest shoots of sugarcane, long before the full harvest. When planters reserved the mature stalks for commercial sugar, enslaved workers cut the tender tops and simmered them slowly, extracting a thin but sweet syrup. This homemade sweetener flavored cornbread, porridge, and hot drinks, adding a rare touch of luxury to daily meals. The technique reflected both African experience with cane and Caribbean methods of small batch syrup making. After emancipation, many rural families continued to boil cane juice into syrup during the early season, a practice still alive in parts of Louisiana and Florida. The flavor is lighter and grassier than late-season molasses, making it unique among Southern sweeteners. Cane top syrup shows how skilled hands transformed what might have been discarded into something valuable, blending cultural knowledge with the natural rhythms of the crop. It stands as a reminder that, even in conditions of deprivation, African American cooks created enduring regional flavors that remain treasured in Southern pantries today. Field pea salad with hot pepper vinegar offered a cool bite for the hottest Southern evenings. Tender field peas were boiled until just soft, then chilled and tossed with diced onions, sweet peppers, and a splash of sharp vinegar infused with fiery peppers. The salad balanced earthy legumes with a bright tang that woke the palate after long days in the sun. Served on wide porches as cicadas sang, it accompanied fried chicken, grilled fish, or simply a hunk of cornbread. Home gardeners prized field peas for their reliability in poor soil, and the vinegar peppers were often homemade, steeped for weeks in glass bottles on sunny windowsills. Guests at summer suppers remembered the sting of the vinegar and the gentle sweetness of the peas as the taste of true Southern hospitality. Today, packaged beans and bottled dressings have replaced the careful soaking and seasoning that once defined the dish, but the memory of its crisp, refreshing bite lingers in kitchens where tradition still holds strong. Which forgotten dessert made you hungriest for the past? Tell us in the comments, like the video, and subscribe to taste more history one bite at a time.